Hi, thanks for joining me. My name is Mary Giuliano, and I have been conducting some interviews of long-term Fernie residents on life and times in Fernie, and we're talking about the way Fernie used to be and the way Fernie is today. And so I've been asked to give my perspective on how I have found Fernie has changed over the years. I've lived here, it'll be 66 years next year, so I think I'm probably one of the dinosaurs of Fernie, because there's not too many left, but I certainly have a perspective from the 50s. I arrived in Fernie in 1953. I was 7 years old, and I came across the ocean on the liner called Saturnia, and it was I think it was 15 days. I was seasick almost the entire time. Then we landed in Halifax and took a train that took 5-6 days to get to Fernie, and we got off the train station. The station that's there now, that is now the arts station. I remember seeing so much land from Halifax to Fernie. I wondered when we would get to our destination, because Italy is pretty small. What I remember first about Fernie is that there was fields and fields of dandelions, and what I loved was the yellow coverage of all these dandelions. I have loved dandelions ever since. I noticed that Fernie was really tiny and that it was really mountainous, and loved it immediately. My poor mother, though, I recall saying that she felt that she had arrived in the wilderness, and that if she'd had the money, she would have gone back to Italy. But she did learn to love Fernie and did appreciate it. Fernie in the 50s, late 50s, was pretty small. Downtown, there were many lots that were empty. There was quite a few businesses, some that have since burnt down, which is a shame. The King's Hotel, the Napanee, the King Edward, the Frozen Foods are just some of the buildings that were on Victoria Avenue, because that's what it was called at the time, 2nd Avenue, that burnt down. But Fernie had a lot of people that lived downtown. Every shop downtown had apartments up on top, and with the Napanees and the Queens, it meant that Fernie was really, the downtown was busy all the time. I also remember that Fernie, the shops were, on Mondays they were closed, and they were closed half a day on Wednesdays, and of course they were closed on Sundays. So Sundays and Mondays were pretty quiet. Sundays especially, you hardly ever met anybody on the street. But on a Friday night, you could go shopping with your parents, and it was busy. It was really lovely, especially around Christmas time. People did a lot of shopping. Fernie had one school when I was growing up here, and it was called Fernie Central School. It's 901 right now, but back then it was grade 1 to grade 12, and actually for a period of time they also offered grade 13. Most of the people in Fernie worked at the mine. In the 50s, Coal Creek was still working. I think it closed down in 1958. That made a big difference to Fernie, because there was a mass exodus of residents after the mine shut down. And so that's when Fernie started to become quiet. But there was a mill, which is where my father worked. It was owned by James White, who was the mayor of Fernie for 19 years, and I believe is the longest running mayor ever for Fernie. So, for a period of time, I remember in the 50s still, the mines weren't working. The ones in Michelle, Natal, in that area, were not working full time. And they would blow a siren to let people know if there was going to be work. And I remember that that siren was always a creepy sound, because it sounded something like the war sirens that they used to sound in the late, when I was a little kid in the late 40s, in 48, 49. I don't know why they were still sounding them in Italy at the time, but I just recall that. But I loved Fernie from the first day. I found the mountains amazing. I found the small town really interesting. I found the people really lovely. As an immigrant family, I did not notice any prejudice against us, but maybe that's because there were so many new immigrants to Fernie in the 50s and 60s, especially Italians. In the 50s, a lot of Italians came, and most of them came because the government went to Europe wanting young men to come and work. And so they sponsored a lot of people. And my father was sponsored. He applied and was accepted. He was only 26 at the time. His uncle as well, and quite a few of the friends from our town of Italy came. And a lot of them ended up in Fernie. Most of them ended up working in the mine. Fernie was a very interesting little town. It had a lot of family-based grocery businesses, like the Fiorillos and the Guzzis and the Rahals, and a lot of the butcher shops like Wozniak's and Maffioli. Even the dry cleaners was owned by the Rahals and Colgers. When I was a kid, in the alley behind 2nd Avenue, there were still a lot of old buildings that some of them apparently used to be Chinese laundries, because you could tell that there was writing on there with Chinese names. That was quite interesting. And over the years, with interviewing a lot of the Fernie seniors, they told me that 3rd Avenue was considered, in the 40s, and it was considered the red light district, and that would be from, say, where City Hall is now to a couple of blocks down on 3rd Avenue, considered the red light district. That was interesting to me. The fact that there was Chinese laundries and Chinese stores not only on 3rd, but also on 2nd Avenue, closer to 11th Street and between 10th and 11th Street. Those weren't there when I was a kid, but I always, the actual businesses weren't there, but there was remnants of writing where you could tell, and I always found that very interesting, because history just intrigues me. I like to think of the people that were living in Fernie at the turn of the century. I like to think of the people that built Fernie right at the beginning. You know, in 1897, I believe, Fernie was started, and it burnt down in 2004, and then it burned down again in 1904 and 1908. But at least in 1908, I believe 36 buildings were still standing. I don't think there was much left in 1904. But in 1904 was when Fernie was incorporated. So it became a city. And actually, Fernie, and this is a true fact, Fernie is the only city that is completely encircled by the Rocky Mountains. Completely encircled. So that makes us pretty unique. But talking about Fernie, when I was growing up, we had Fiorillo store. We had, which offered groceries, dry goods. We had Guzzi store, and that was on 2nd Avenue on the corner of 11th and 2nd. And the Guzzi family used to offer homemade sausages and all kinds of Italian goodies. We had the second-hand store that was owned by the Pattersons, and the second-hand store had all kinds of stuff. It had shelves with some canned goods and some dry goods, but it had a glass case that was used as almost like a counter, and inside the glass case you could go in there and you could see all these penny candies. And so they had all those little black candies, which I won't tell you what they used to call them back then, and they had the strawberries, and they had all these wonderful candies. And for a nickel you could get a little bag, paper bag full of candy. And so because it was right just 2 doors away from the school, at recess most of the kids would run over to the second-hand store and come out with a little bag of penny candy, usually just a nickel. Those candies tasted so good, but it was probably because, you know, it wasn't often that we got candy. School was interesting. When I first started school in Fernie, the girls would line up on 3rd Avenue at that back entrance, and the boys would line up on 2nd Avenue. And so we would come in from the 2 entrances, and we would, on Mondays, we would all line up in our respective grades, and that was like an assembly. And we would recite the Our Father, we would recite O Canada, and we would recite God Save the Queen. And then we would go to our rooms to start. I think that stopped by 1957, 58. That had stopped. The school had a bell tower, which you could go up the stairs. It had beautiful stairs on either end of the entrances, the 3rd and the 2nd, and the entrance and those stairs were beautiful wood with wide curved stair, I don't know what you'd call it, like a balustrades going up. And on the back one you could go all the way up to where the bell tower was, and you could even ding the bell. School in Fernie was quite interesting. The teachers would have classes of 30 to 40 children. And honestly, I do not recall any of those kids being rude to the teachers. We had recess, but we didn't get up unless we put our hand up. Most of the time everybody was quiet. Really quite interesting, different from today. I went and volunteered in Brandon's class in it would be the 90s, because he's 25 now, and I couldn't get over how the kids would get up and walk around, and not even ask the teacher or put their hands up. Very interesting, the difference between, those generations. What can I think about Fernie? In the 50s and the early 60s, Isabella Dickin, that whole area was the North End grounds fields, and the city owned some of that property, and they leased it out, I think for $250 a year to anybody that wanted to. And so of course my father, loving growing things, leased 2 huge lots, and all of us 4 children were there helping him with the planting, helping with the weeding, helping with when it was time to harvest. And so when all our school chums were going down to the soccer field and the ball field, riding their bikes, they would come by and they'd wave at us while we were in the field. The North End grounds were really good because every weekend there was competitions. Softball, they had competitions from Cranbrook, Kimberley, the Crow's Nest Pass, and even beyond, Nelson, even the U.S. And so we would watch soccer, we would watch all kinds of games. There was this huge bandstand where people could sit and watch the soccer especially. Fernie had a really good team. It was called Fernie United. It was fun. And Labor Day. They used to have these fantastic Labor Day celebrations. On Monday, which was actually Labor Day, they would have this huge parade. And what I found absolutely mesmerizing were, I didn't know who they were at the time, but it was these men in these costumes with tassels and gold, and I found out that it was members of the, oh my goodness, I can't even think. Anyway, they used to have a camel as part of this big camel on a float, and they would walk next to the camel, and they were so exotic looking, and it'll come to me who they are. And they would have bands from all over, and it was a really huge parade, and they'd have all kinds of things going on at the ball field. They stopped that in the 60s because for several years, every Labor Day, it would be pouring rain, and they would have to cancel a lot of everything that was happening. Fernie actually didn't have that much to offer in the 50s and 60s. As far as shopping, we did have some really lovely small stores. Like for instance, we had the Rahals, and you would go into Rahals, and Mrs. Rahal would show you if you wanted gloves, or if you wanted something that, like for a lady, for a slip, then she had everything in boxes behind the counter, and she would take them out and would lay them out, and it was so elegant the way she did things. MC Cash was the grocery store that was the biggest one in Fernie at the time, and that was on 2nd Avenue. And they were really great. They used to give credit. All of the stores used to give credit to all of the people that lived in Fernie, something that they don't do now, but then now again, people have credit cards, so they have credit. They still use credit. Fernie has always been a really good place to live. We have, after Kaiser came in, Fernie changed. There was a whole influx of immigrants that came to work at the mine, and suddenly, after being quiet for a few years, Fernie became really lively. There were dances and there was all kinds of events happening. There was lots going on. And it was really wonderful. Of course, Fernie's had what they call the boom and bust because of mining. We've had years where mining was great, and then we had Westar go down, and then again we saw a whole influx of people leave. And I remember bankers saying that people would just go in and throw the keys on the counter and just leave their homes and go because the jobs weren't there anymore. Those weren't very good times. But Fernie recovered, as it always does, and it started with the ski hill, with Heiko and Linda Socher and all their partners, and they kept Fernie going with the hill being a great place for all the locals to go and ski. And then after I think 20 years, the hill was sold to Charlie Locke, who marketed it all over the world, and suddenly Fernie got discovered as a resort. And that's when things changed again. And the changes were different than the changes from before. We ended up with fast food stores and a couple of big, what they call big box stores. We ended up with some really unique shopping downtown. We now have the really fast fiber so that people can come, and they're living here and working here out of Fernie. So we have a very busy town, winter and summer. Am I forgetting anything, Patrick?
Well, I guess I'd like to ask you about the changes from, say, the like the 90s and to like the 2010s, in those 10 years that you've seen.
Let me think. The tourism really changed Fernie. The biggest change was the cost of housing. Suddenly, Fernie became this place that people wanted to come and visit. As they used to say, it was a place where you came to play, and not only just to visit and live, but to play. And people wanted to come, and they did. But with all of that came all the realtors and all the high prices of owning a home, and of even living in Fernie if you didn't own a home, because apartments are no longer being built, because for a developer there was no money in an apartment. The money is in homes that are being built now, homes that are as high as $1, $2, $3 million and higher. So Fernie's had some tough times, not only the fires, floods, natural disasters in the mines, but it also, in 1931, went into receivership. So the provincial government appointed somebody to run the city right up until 1945, when the city finally had an elected council to run things. In the 90s, because of, I believe that's when Westar went down, Fernie had the city of Fernie had some difficulties. It almost went bankrupt. So in the years following that, councils were quite prudent in how they decided to put money away. And in the past almost 3 decades, almost $12 million were put away in reserves. And that was because the people that were running the show then were cognizant of the fact that Fernie had had all these challenges. But Fernie is very resilient. As you can tell from the 100+ years, it seems to be able to recover from all of the things that have happened. And that's due to the people, I believe, that have moved to Fernie, have come here. In the last 10 years, for instance, we have faced high costs of living in regards to housing, especially. You know, change is inevitable, and we've had many changes. The biggest change in Fernie, I believe, was caused by tourism, and tourism brought a lot of good things to Fernie. It brought in fast food places, big box stores, more. I think we have like 58 restaurants. You could count on both hands before how many restaurants, even probably less than that we used to have. So the tourism has brought in a variety of people with all kinds of talents. So there's lots going on in Fernie. There's very talented people. There's a really strong arts and culture community. There's a strong group of people that are into the sports, into mountain biking, and we have a world-class fly fishing river, the Elk River, that goes through our town. We have all the mountain biking, all of the outdoor sports. Fernie has become a mecca for sports, people that love sports. But there's also the people that don't work in the mines, that are working service jobs, and those people are struggling to find accommodation. It's difficult to build a house in Fernie if you don't have basically a really good income and a 2-income household. And to keep Fernie the wonderful town that it is, you need all of the demographic types of people that we can get. You want the older, you want the youth, you want the middle-aged, you want the rich, and you want the middle class, you want the poor people. That's what makes a real town. And that's what Fernie is always being called. It's all by visitors always say, we love Fernie because Fernie is a real town. And that's what makes Fernie. But the basis of Fernie is its mining industry. As great as tourism is, I still believe that mining is the backbone of this area. If the mines, if the tech mines were to go down, I think it would be detrimental to this area. I'm not sure if tourism could keep it going in the way that it's going now. But, all we can do is think about how positively people are, how resilient people are, how creative, and hope that Fernie never gets to a point where it has to worry about anything like that. I think that Fernie is going to be here for many, many years. I'm really proud that I spent 16 years of my life being on council, 9 years as a councilor, 7 years as a mayor. I'm proud of the initiatives that I put forward. I'm really happy with the way our town is turned out. I helped with the Miners' Walk. I actually coordinated it. It took a year, and we had a terrific group of people on the committee to make that work. It was mostly donated monies, and we were able to get all that funding. to dedicate something to mining, because before that there was nothing that showed that Fernie was a mining town except that it was named after William Fernie. Well, we've come a long ways. Fernie, I believe, will continue to be a really good place for people to live. I believe that there will always be those people that will persevere regardless of what happens to Fernie. And personally, I want to thank all of the people, past and present, that have contributed to what Fernie is, because it's the people that make the town. It's the people that put forward all of the efforts, come up with all of the ideas, build the town itself, build businesses and offer services. And so to those people, thank you. Thank you for everything you have done for Fernie, and will continue to do so, as I'm sure the future generations will continue. Thank you.